Today we're going to build 3 modern Adirondack chairs using 3 different techniques, everything from limited tools to pretty cool table saw sleds. So the first chair I made is a proof of concept, or a prototype if you will. I laid everything out with a straight edge and a pencil and a little bit of freehand work, and then cut all the parts out with a skill saw and a jigsaw. So nothing fancy. I really like Adirondack chairs, but typically they sit a little bit low for me and they're a little bit cumbersome to move around, so I wanted something a little more modern looking, a little lighter than the traditional Adirondack chair. So this was the design I came up with. And a lot of times when I'm doing a proof of concept, I will literally just beat it out with a skill saw, jigsaw, and build a prototype so I can sit in it, see how it feels, and then I can make adjustments from there for the more permanent builds, if you will. So once I had all the parts cut out for the sides, I needed to figure out how wide I wanted it. And because the shorts I buy are a little wider than the shorts most people buy, I made mine 22 inches wide. Now there's no fancy joinery in this, and I know this is going to disappoint a few people, but this is all just screwed together, and it's very sturdy this way. Now when I had the body of this thing put together, I needed to make slats for it, and rather than cutting individual slats or ripping down stock for slats, I bought some furring strips from the local big box store, and these are 1.5 inches by 3/4 inches tall, and they come in 8-foot sections, so it's pretty easy to rip up what I needed. Now I threw everything together, and we'll talk more about how things go together later in the video, and then just screwed the arms on. And I did go ahead and paint this because I had some paint in the sprayer anyway, and I wanted to see what it would look like with the contrast. Now at this point, I'm really liking the way this chair looks. I love the design. So I finished up the prototype and gave it a test. Now with that rear end really sticking way out there, that cantilevered edge, I know there's a question about stability, but the way this is made, it's very, very stable and holds my weight with no trouble at all. So the second chair I was being a bit more careful with, and I wanted to make a few of these, so I started out by making templates out of some press board. Now I drew this up in SketchUp and sent it to a friend of mine, Brian, who made plans out of it. So there are plans available for anyone who's interested in building it. You'll find that in the description box below. Now again, I'm just laying everything out with a pencil and a straight edge, being careful on my angles, and I'm cutting everything out with a skill saw again, or a circular saw again, but I'm using a straight edge this time on all the parts. Now that little 4-inch spacer lets me put the board right to the line, and the straight edge to that, and that makes it cut perfectly on the line. If you're ever using a straight edge a lot with a circular saw, it's a handy thing to have laying around. So there are a couple curved parts on here, and that's the seats and the back braces, the parts that the back slats get screwed to. So Brian made a couple templates, which was really handy for getting the templates made, or he made a couple of paper templates, and I glued those down to my press board and then very carefully cut them with the jigsaw close to the line, and then sanded down the rest of the way to the line. Now using all of the templates I just made, I laid them out on a 2x12 8-foot long. Now if you're following me on Instagram, you may have heard me mention that you could build this whole chair with a 2x12 8-foot long, and you can build all the main body parts. I did forget that the slats, seat slats and back slats, you'll have to use something else. In this case I want to use cedar anyway, so it worked out. Now when I'm cutting these parts out, I'm being pretty careful. I'm using the straight edge on all the straight parts, and on the curved parts I'm cutting a little bit away from the line, and I'm going to come back and use the pattern that we made and a flush trim router bit to get those perfect. Now, because I'm using basically construction grade material and it's going to get painted, I'm not too worried about screwing into the structured parts of the chair because I can fill them with wood putty and they're going to get painted later. So I just screwed the templates right to the parts, and in this case this is a back brace, and you can use just a small router if that's what you have with a top bearing flush trim bit. You're not going to be able to do the whole 1.5 inch thickness, but you can get it started and then go down and use what you did already as a template of sorts, and you can go the rest of the way through. Now, if you do happen to have a router table and a bigger router, you can use a bit like this and do the whole thing at one time. But remember, when you're climbing grain or going uphill on grain, to take little bits out and then come back and finish it off so you don't get grain tear out. So I want to build some systems to make most of the parts for this chair really rapidly. We are working with a nonprofit group who help prisoners reintegrate in society, teach them job training skills and that sort of thing, and they're going to be building these chairs for us. So in this I wanted to show a really cool system that you can set up with like a table saw sled and make some of the parts with. In this case, this is the front leg, I believe, and what I want to do is create a table saw sled that cuts the entire part. When you're doing batch out work or production work, you really want to handle the material as little as possible, and when you do handle it, accomplish as much as you can. So in this case, this sled will cut the taper and all the angles for this one piece. So you can use your piece of 2x4 or whatever you have, and you cut it once. You pick up the part one time, you cut the whole piece, and it's done. So in this case, I'm cutting 3 angles. I'm starting with the long taper, and then I'm cutting the top angle and then the bottom angle. So the 2x4 sits right in there. You run the first cut, which cuts the long taper on the leg. Then it goes in the second position, cuts the taper on the top, and then the third position, and cuts the taper on the bottom, and I have a finished part. That part is ready for assembly. So I set up a few sleds like this, one for each of the straight parts, and I made another one for the chair that's flat, and we'll see that more here upcoming in the video. So these all get screwed together. There is no half laps or fancy joinery, and it's really not necessary for this. I do, however, want a pre-drill, so I'm using 3 1/4 inch screws on this particular part of the build. So I'll lay those out on the piece to make sure that I'm not going to be poking out, draw a couple lines, and drill my holes there. And then I am adding glue to this joint. I'm not sure that it adds a lot of strength to it, but it makes me feel better. So when you're putting these together, you need to put the seat to the back slat first, because once you put the leg on the bottom, you can't get to that joint. Little trick, if you don't want to get glue squeeze out on your work pad or on your table, just put a little blue tape underneath it, and that will protect it from getting glue everywhere. In this case, it's a good idea to clamp these. I'm using the arm clamp in this situation, but it worked. So where the back leg, this is what we're calling the back leg because it goes to the back, attaches to the seat, I'm adding 3 screws. And again, a little bit of glue. And I lay the screws out to make sure that they're not going to protrude through, and then I draw lines to where they need to go, and that helps me guide where my drill position is. Now with 2 sides made, I need to lay out where the stretchers are going to go, and in this case I want the stretcher to be right below the seat. So I lay everything out, mark it out with the pencil, and then I drill all my holes. And I do this for all the parts on the chair. Now if you do get the plan sets, you'll notice that it calls for a rabbet in the seat and in the back. Now because I didn't have a bit large enough for that, I'm just skipping that step, and I cut out a second part that I'm going to screw right to the side of the chair, and that's what the seat slats will sit on. So they'll be inset into the chair rather than sitting on top of the chair. And I like that reveal. When you look at the front of the chair, there's this big long reveal, and it's pretty sharp once the chair is painted. So the only part of this build that really required the table saw, and this could be done by hand, was the the chamfer cut on the front stretcher. So I laid that out and then marked out my little brace there, if you want to call it that, so I could fit those things together. So I do all that prior to screwing this together and then drill all my hole positions. I hope this is making sense. So once I knew where all the holes were, I came back on the opposite side, or the outside of the chair, and drilled a 5/8 hole, roughly 1/2 inch deep. And that's just gonna, when I put the screws in, I'm gonna be able to come back and plug that with a 5/8 dowel I had laying around. Of course, it could be 3/8 or 1/2 inch, whatever you have. So I laid all the rest of the parts out according to the plans, and again, just screwed everything together. Now on the back braces, there's no glue, it's just screws, and 1 screw per on each side. And that's all it needs. When the slats are in place, that gives it all the strength it needs. Again, a little glue and some dowels, and ready to install the front leg and get this thing ready for paint. So if you're building a bunch of these, I would build some kind of jig to hold the chair at the right height where you want it. But in this case, I just used a clamp and a board, set my front leg in place, marked it out, and then drilled the holes. Then I came back from the other side and put the screws in. Now I'm doing this before I put the brace on the side, because the brace that the seat slats will sit on will actually cover those screw holes on the top part of the seat. Now the last thing I'm going to do before I paint is lay out where the arms are going on this particular chair. So I just put them in place, mark it out with a pencil, then drill a couple holes. And I put a little chamfer in from the back because once I paint this, those little holes could disappear. It's just easier to find them. So in this case, I am spraying them on with a little $15 gravity-fed sprayer from Harbor Freight. I don't mind using these for paint because I can, they're $15, so it's not like a big loss. Or you can just brush it on, of course. Now this is the other chair that I built. I actually built the frame for this on a live in my Toolmasters association, so I didn't really film it. But it's basically all the same parts except for there's no back bracing because that's just flat, and there's no seat cup. I designed that one to kind of put cushions on, but unfortunately they didn't get here in time, so I didn't get any pictures of that. Now in this case I'm using cedar, and I'm using cedar fence slats from the big box store because they're cheap. I just ripped them down to the size that I needed. It took 3 slats per chair, and then a couple pieces of cedar I had left over for the arms. Now on the arms, I just did the same thing. I drilled 2 5/8 holes, went all the way through, and then I can cover the screws with dowels once they're screwed down. Now it's very important that you put the arms on before you put the back slats on, because you can't get to the back slats once that's done. So now on this one, I'm just using the fence parts all the way through. I'm not ripping them down at all and then just sanding them because there's supposed to be a cushion on them, but obviously there's not. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I want to mention that these chairs are really solid the way they are. I had a few people say some things over on Instagram as I was posting over there, like they weren't sure if it was solid enough. Well, there's the 350-pound test right there. You can lean back in this one, you can jump up and down on it, it is great. Now I do have plans for this available, so if you're interested in building one, links in the description box below. And if you're not following me on Instagram, head on over there, check me out. I post stuff daily as things are happening in the shop so you can see it in real time. Now if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and of course if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. Lots of crazy cool projects coming down the pipe. We'll talk to you later.